I still remember the exact weight of that moment. The way my heart pounded so loud I was sure it would wake him. The way my hand trembled just inches away from more money than I had ever seen in my entire 14 years of life. And the way Donald Trump sat there in that leather chair, eyes closed, breathing steady, completely unaware that a poor kid from West Palm Beach was about to make a decision that would change everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the summer of 2014, when my whole world existed between a cramped 2-bedroom apartment and the golden gates of Mar-a-Lago. My name is Marcus Williams, and my mother Gloria had been cleaning houses for wealthy families in Palm Beach since before I was born. She started when she was just 19, fresh out of high school with no college degree and a baby on the way. My father, well, he's not part of this story. He left before I took my first breath, and my mother never spoke his name again. Some wounds, she told me once, heal better when you don't keep touching them. For 8 years, my mother worked at Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump's sprawling estate that sat like a palace on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean. She was part of the housekeeping staff, one of dozens of workers who kept that massive property running like a well-oiled machine. She scrubbed floors, changed linens, polished silver, and cleaned bathrooms that were bigger than our entire apartment. And she did it all without a single complaint. Every morning she would wake up at 4:30, make me breakfast, lay out my clothes for school, and catch the first bus to Palm Beach. She wouldn't return until 7 or 8 at night, her hands cracked and dry, her feet swollen, her back aching. But she always came home with a smile, always asked about my homework, always made sure I knew I was loved. We didn't have much. Our apartment was in a rough part of West Palm Beach, the kind of neighborhood where you learn to walk fast and keep your eyes down. The walls were thin, the air conditioning barely worked, and every month was a juggling act between rent, utilities, and groceries. But my mother made that little apartment feel like a home. She hung curtains she'd sewn herself, kept fresh flowers on the kitchen table when she could afford them, and filled every corner with warmth and love. I went to a public school about 3 miles from our apartment. It wasn't a bad school, but it wasn't good either. The textbooks were outdated, the classrooms were overcrowded, and most of the kids came from families just like mine, families barely holding on. I was a good student, not because I was naturally gifted, but because my mother drilled into me from an early age that education was my only ticket out. She would sit with me every night, helping me with my homework, even though she barely understood half of it herself. She believed in me more than I believed in myself. But being a good student didn't protect me from the cruelty of other kids. They made fun of my clothes, my shoes, the fact that I brought the same peanut butter sandwich to lunch every single day. They called me names I won't repeat here. They reminded me constantly of my place in the world, of the invisible line that separated people like me from people like them. The worst part was the shoes. I had one pair of sneakers, a worn-out pair of Nikes that my mother had bought from a thrift store 2 years earlier. The soles were coming apart. The laces had been replaced twice, and there was a hole near the toe that I tried to cover with a marker. Every day I walked into school praying no one would notice. Every day someone did. There was this kid named Tyler Richmond. His father was a lawyer, his mother was a doctor, and Tyler wore a different pair of expensive sneakers every week. He made it his personal mission to remind me of everything I didn't have. He would point at my shoes and laugh. He would ask loudly if I had found them in a dumpster. He would make jokes about my mother being a maid, about how she spent her days cleaning up after people who were actually important. I wanted to hit him. God, I wanted to hit him so bad. But my mother had taught me better than that. She always said that anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So I swallowed my rage, clenched my fists in my pockets, and walked away. Every single time. That summer, everything changed. It was mid-July, and my mother had been working extra shifts because several staff members had called in sick. Mar-a-Lago was preparing for some big event, and every hand was needed. One afternoon, she called me from work and told me she wouldn't be able to pick me up from summer program. She asked if I could take the bus to Mar-a-Lago and wait for her there until her shift ended. I had been to Mar-a-Lago a few times before, always staying in the staff areas, always keeping my head down. But this time was different. When I arrived, my mother was nowhere to be found. One of the other housekeepers, a kind woman named Rosa, told me that my mother was cleaning the private residence on the other side of the estate and that I should wait in the staff break room. But I was 14, and I was curious. And that massive building with its golden columns and marble floors called to me like a siren song. I told Rosa I was going to find a bathroom. Instead, I wandered. I walked through hallways lined with paintings that probably cost more than my mother would earn in a lifetime. I passed rooms filled with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. I climbed a staircase that seemed to go on forever, my worn-out sneakers silent on the plush carpet. And then I found the office. The door was slightly open, just a crack, and I could see inside. It was the most magnificent room I had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, a massive wooden desk that gleamed under the soft light, windows that looked out over the ocean, the afternoon sun painting everything in shades of gold. And there, in a leather chair near the window, sat Donald Trump. I recognized him immediately. Everyone knew who he was. The buildings with his name on them, the TV show, the constant presence in newspapers and magazines. He was one of the most famous men in America, and he was right there, not 20 feet away from me. He appeared to be asleep. His eyes were closed, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, his hands resting on the arms of the chair. He looked smaller than he did on television, more human. For a long moment, I just stood there, frozen, not sure what to do. I knew I should leave. I knew I had no business being there, but something held me in place. That's when I saw the wallet. It was sitting on a small table next to the chair, brown leather, expensive looking, and it was open. Inside, I could see a thick stack of bills. Hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars just sitting there, completely unguarded. My breath caught in my throat. I had never seen that much money in my entire life. My mother worked 60 hours a week and brought home barely enough to cover our bills. She had been saving for years to buy me a new pair of shoes for school. Real shoes, not thrift store hand-me-downs. And here was more money than she would make in months, just lying there like it was nothing. I thought about all the times I had gone to bed hungry because we couldn't afford enough food. I thought about my grandmother, my mother's mother, who lived in a nursing home and needed medication we couldn't pay for. I thought about the hole in my shoe and Tyler Richmond's mocking laughter. I thought about how unfair it all was, how some people had so much while others had so little. Surely, he wouldn't miss it. A man like Donald Trump, with all his buildings and his golf courses and his private jets, what was a few $100s to him? It was nothing. It was less than nothing. He probably spent more than that on lunch. I took a step closer, then another. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. My palms were sweating. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to run, to get out of there. But my feet kept moving forward. I was standing right next to the table now, close enough to touch the wallet, close enough to count the bills. There had to be at least $3,000 there, maybe more. $3,000. Enough to pay off our back rent. Enough to buy my grandmother's medication for 6 months. Enough to get my mother a day off, just one day where she didn't have to work herself to the bone. I reached out my hand. My fingers were trembling. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on me from all sides. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and shallow. I could hear the ticking of a clock somewhere behind me. I could hear the distant crash of waves against the shore. "Just take it," a voice whispered in my head. "No one will ever know. He's asleep. There are no cameras. Your mother will never have to struggle again. Just take it and walk away." My fingers brushed the leather of the wallet. It was soft, warm from the sunlight streaming through the window. I started to close my hand around the bills. And then I heard my mother's voice. Not literally. She wasn't there. But I heard her as clearly as if she were standing right beside me. I heard the words she had spoken to me 1,000 times, words that had shaped me, molded me, made me who I was. We might be poor, Marcus, but we will never be dishonest. They can take everything from us, but they cannot take our integrity. That belongs to us. That is ours. And no amount of money in the world is worth selling your soul. I pulled my hand back like the wallet had burned me. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at that money, my whole body shaking. The temptation was still there, still pulling at me, still whispering all the reasons why I should just take it and run. But my mother's voice was louder. Her love was stronger. Her lessons had taken root too deep. I was not a thief. I would never be a thief. No matter how hard things got, no matter how much I struggled, I would not betray everything my mother had taught me. I would not become the person that people like Tyler Richmond already assumed I was. Slowly, carefully, I reached out and closed the wallet. I placed it exactly where it had been, adjusting it so that it looked like it had never been touched. Then I took a step back, then another, and I turned toward the door. I was going to leave. I was going to walk out of that office and never speak of this moment again. I was going to pretend it had never happened, but I only made it 3 steps, because that's when Donald Trump opened his eyes. And when I looked into them, I realized with a jolt of ice-cold terror that he had been awake the entire time. If this story is already touching your heart, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. This moment changed my life forever, and I need to share the rest with you. Donald Trump didn't move. He didn't stand up or reach for a phone or call for security. He just sat there in that leather chair, his eyes fixed on mine, and the look on his face was something I couldn't read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't surprise. It was something else entirely. Something that made me feel like he was looking straight through me, into every secret I had ever kept. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled tight. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stand there, paralyzed, waiting for the axe to fall. My mother was going to lose her job. We were going to lose our apartment. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed was about to be destroyed because I couldn't control my curiosity. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, quiet. Nothing like the booming confidence I had heard on television. You were going to take it. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a fact, and we both knew it was true. I opened my mouth to deny it, to make excuses, to beg for forgiveness, but no words came out. What could I possibly say? He had seen everything. He had watched me stand over that wallet, watched me reach for the money, watched me struggle with the worst version of myself. There was no lie I could tell that would change what he had witnessed. So I told the truth. "Yes, sir," I whispered. I was going to take it. He nodded slowly, like this was the answer he had expected. His eyes never left mine. "But you didn't." "No, sir." "Why not?" The question hung in the air between us. And in that moment, standing in that golden office with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, I thought about everything my mother had given me. Not money, not things, but something far more valuable. A compass, a code, a way of moving through the world that had nothing to do with what was in my pockets and everything to do with what was in my heart. Because my mother taught me better, I said, and because taking that money wouldn't make me rich, it would just make me a thief. Donald Trump leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since he opened his eyes, something shifted in his expression. The hard, unreadable mask softened just slightly, and I caught a glimpse of something that looked almost like respect, almost like recognition. He gestured to a chair across from him. "Sit down." It wasn't a request, but it wasn't a command either. It was something in between, and I found myself moving before I could think about whether I should. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else as I walked across that enormous office and lowered myself into a chair that probably cost more than everything my mother and I owned combined. For a long moment he just looked at me, studied me. like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. I wanted to look away, to stare at the floor, to disappear into the expensive fabric of that chair. But something told me that would be a mistake. So I held his gaze, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. "What's your name?" he asked. "Marcus," I said. "Marcus Williams." "And your mother works here?" "Yes, sir. Gloria Williams. She's been on the housekeeping staff for 8 years. He nodded slowly, processing this information. 8 years. That's a long time. She must be good at her job. "She's the best," I said, and I meant it. There was no one in the world who worked harder than my mother. No one more dedicated, more thorough, more determined to do everything right. She had built her entire reputation on being someone people could trust, someone who would never cut corners or make excuses. And here I was, her son, almost destroying everything she had built with one moment of weakness. The thought made my stomach turn. "I'm sorry," I blurted out. "I'm so sorry. Please don't fire her." This wasn't her fault. She didn't even know I was here. I was supposed to wait in the staff room, but I wandered off and I found this office and I saw the money and I don't know what I was thinking. But please, please don't punish her for what I almost did. She needs this job. We need this job. The words tumbled out in a rush, desperate and raw. I could feel tears burning in the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had already shown enough weakness for one day. Donald Trump held up a hand and I fell silent immediately. "Your mother's job is not in danger," he said. "Not because of this." The relief that washed over me was so intense I almost collapsed, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. If he wasn't going to fire my mother, then what was this? Why was he sitting here talking to me instead of calling security? Why was he looking at me like I was something more than just a poor kid who had almost stolen from him? "You want to know why I was pretending to sleep?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought about it. I had been too busy drowning in shame and fear to wonder about anything else. But now that he mentioned it, it did seem strange. A man like Donald Trump falling asleep in the middle of the afternoon with his wallet wide open and thousands of dollars exposed? It didn't make sense. I waited for him to explain. He stood up from his chair and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The sunlight caught the gold of his watch, the gleam of his cufflinks. Everything about him radiated wealth and power. And yet, in that moment, he seemed almost tired, almost human. "I've been robbed," he said quietly. "Not once. Not twice. More times than I can count. By employees, by partners, by people I trusted with my life. When you have money, everyone wants a piece of it. Everyone thinks they deserve a share. And some of them decide to take it whether you offer it or not." He turned to face me, so I started testing people, leaving cash where it could be found, pretending to be asleep or distracted, watching to see what they would do when they thought no one was looking. You'd be surprised how many people fail that test. Good people. People who smile at you and shake your hand and tell you how much they respect you. The moment they think they can get away with it, they show you who they really are. He walked back toward me and I felt myself shrinking into the chair, not because I was afraid anymore, but because I was starting to understand. This hadn't been an accident. This had been a trap. And I had walked right into it. "But here's the thing," he continued, stopping just a few feet away from me. "Here's what makes today different. You were going to take it. I saw it in your eyes. I saw your hand reaching for that wallet. You were seconds away from becoming just another thief, just another disappointment, just another person who proved that trust is a fool's game." He leaned closer, and his voice dropped to almost a whisper. "But you stopped yourself. Something inside you said no. And you put that wallet down and you walked away. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" I shook my head. I didn't trust myself to speak. He straightened up and moved to his desk, leaning against it with his arms crossed. "I've done this test dozens of times, maybe hundreds. And I can count on one hand the number of people who passed. Most people take the money and run. Some people take a little, thinking I won't notice. A few take it all and don't even bother to hide what they've done. But almost no one puts it back and walks away. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over me. So I want to know more. I want to understand what makes you different. Because right now you're the most interesting person I've met in a very long time. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to explain that I wasn't special, that I wasn't different, that I was just a scared kid who had been raised by a woman who refused to let him become something less than what he could be. But another part of me, a part that had been silent and small for so long, wanted to believe that maybe he was right. Maybe there was something in me worth noticing. Maybe all those years of struggle and sacrifice hadn't been for nothing. "Tell me about your life," Donald Trump said. "Tell me everything." And so I did. I told him about the apartment with the thin walls and the broken air conditioning. I told him about my mother working double shifts, coming home with her hands raw and her feet swollen, still finding the energy to help me with my homework. I told him about my father who left before I was born, about growing up with an empty space where a dad should have been, about learning to be the man of the house before I even knew what that meant. I told him about school, about being the poor kid in a sea of middle-class faces, about Tyler Richmond and his expensive sneakers and his cruel laughter, about the hole in my shoe that I covered with marker, hoping no one would notice, about eating the same peanut butter sandwich every day while other kids threw away food they didn't even want. I told him about my grandmother, my mother's mother, who lived in a nursing home because she had Alzheimer's and couldn't take care of herself anymore. About the medication she needed that cost more than we could afford. About how my mother visited her every Sunday, even though my grandmother didn't always remember who she was, even though it broke my mother's heart every single time. I told him about my dreams, about wanting to go to college, to become a lawyer, to build a life where my mother never had to clean another person's house again. About lying awake at night wondering if any of it was possible, wondering if kids like me ever really made it out. And through all of it, Donald Trump just listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't check his phone or look at his watch. He just sat there, giving me his complete attention, like what I was saying actually mattered. When I finally ran out of words, the office felt different. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the floor. I had no idea how much time had passed. It felt like hours. It felt like minutes. It felt like something outside of time altogether. Donald Trump was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to the bookshelf, pulling down a thick volume and flipping through its pages. "You know what the difference is between people who succeed and people who don't?" he asked without looking up. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. Everyone thinks it's talent, or luck, or connections. And sure, those things help. But I've known plenty of talented people who never amounted to anything, plenty of lucky people who threw it all away, plenty of connected people who couldn't get out of their own way. He closed the book and turned to face me. "The real difference is character. It's what you do when no one's watching. It's the choices you make when the easy path and the right path go in different directions. Most people follow the easy path. They tell themselves they'll do better next time, that this one exception doesn't count, that everyone else is doing it, so why shouldn't they? And before they know it, they've become people they never meant to be." He walked toward me, still holding the book. "But every once in a while, you meet someone who's different. Someone who chooses the hard right over the easy wrong, even when it costs them, even when no one would ever know. Those are the people who change the world. Those are the people worth investing in." He handed me the book. I looked down at the cover. It was a biography of Abraham Lincoln. "Lincoln grew up poor," he said. "Dirt poor. Lost his mother when he was young. Failed at almost everything he tried. But he had something inside him that wouldn't quit. Something that kept pushing him forward, kept making him choose integrity over convenience, kept making him believe that he could be more than what the world told him he was." I ran my fingers over the cover, feeling the weight of what he was saying. "You remind me of him," Donald Trump said. "Not because you're going to be president. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But because you've got that same thing inside you. That same refusal to let circumstances define you. That same commitment to being better than the easy choice." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever talked to me like this before. No one had ever looked at me and seen something more than a poor kid with holes in his shoes. I felt tears threatening again, and this time I couldn't stop them. One slid down my cheek before I could wipe it away. Donald Trump pretended not to notice. He walked back to his chair and sat down, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Let me tell you something I've never told anyone," he said. "Something that happened to me when I was about your age." I leaned forward, the book clutched to my chest. "I grew up with money," he continued. "That's no secret. My father was successful, and I never had to worry about where my next meal was coming from. But that doesn't mean I didn't face tests. That doesn't mean I always made the right choice." He paused, and I saw something flicker across his face, something that looked almost like pain. When I was 15, I was working in one of my father's buildings. Learning the business from the ground up, he called it. One day I found an envelope full of cash in a storage room. Must have been $2,000. Someone had lost it or hidden it or forgotten about it, and I was alone. No cameras, no witnesses, no way anyone would ever know. He looked directly at me. I took it. The confession hung in the air between us. I didn't know what to say. I had expected him to tell me a story about passing a test, about proving his character, about showing the world what he was made of. Not this. I told myself all the same things you probably told yourself, he continued. That I deserved it. That no one would miss it. That it wasn't really stealing if it was just sitting there. I spent that money on things I didn't need, trying to fill a hole that money could never fill. And you know what I felt afterward? I shook my head. Empty. Sick. Like I had given away something precious for a handful of paper. I couldn't sleep for weeks. Every time my father looked at me, I was sure he knew. Every time I walked past that storage room, I felt the shame burning in my chest. That $2,000 cost me more than any amount of money I've ever spent. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. It took me years to understand what I had really lost that day. Not just my integrity, but my innocence. The belief that I was a good person, that I could trust myself, that I would always do the right thing. I had to rebuild that from nothing. I had to earn back my own respect through thousands of small choices, thousands of moments where I proved to myself that I was better than that scared 15-year-old boy in the storage room. He focused on me again, and his gaze was intense. That's why I do these tests. Not to catch thieves, not to punish people, but to find the ones who are different. The ones who can look at temptation and walk away. Because those people, those rare and precious people, they deserve every opportunity the world can give them. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process everything he had just told me. Donald Trump, one of the richest men in America, confessing to me that he had once been a thief. That he understood exactly what I had felt standing over that wallet. That he had been in my shoes, in his own way, and he had failed where I had succeeded. It was the most human moment I had ever witnessed, and it changed something inside me. Something fundamental, something permanent. "You passed the test," he said quietly. "You proved that you're not like most people. And I don't say that lightly. I've met presidents and kings and billionaires, and most of them would have taken that money without a second thought. But you, a 14-year-old kid with holes in his shoes and every reason in the world to steal, you put it back and walked away." He stood up and extended his hand. "I want to help you, Marcus Williams. I want to give you the opportunities that your character deserves. Will you let me?" I stared at his hand, my mind racing. This didn't feel real. Things like this didn't happen to kids like me. We didn't get discovered by billionaires. We didn't get offered opportunities. We worked and struggled and hoped for the best, and usually the best never came. But his hand was still there, waiting. And my mother's voice was in my head again, different words this time. When a door opens, Marcus, you don't ask why. You walk through it. Because you never know if it will open again. I reached out and shook his hand. His grip was firm, confident, the handshake of a man who had built empires. Good, he said. Now let's go find your mother. I think she and I need to have a conversation. The walk through Mar-a-Lago felt different than it had before. The hallways that had seemed intimidating now felt almost welcoming. The paintings and sculptures and golden fixtures were no longer symbols of everything I would never have. They were just things. Beautiful things, yes. Expensive things. But just things. What mattered was walking beside me. What mattered was what I had proven to myself in that office. What mattered was the door that had just swung open in front of me. We found my mother in one of the ballrooms on the ground floor. She was on her knees, scrubbing at a stain on the marble floor, her uniform damp with sweat, her hair escaping from the neat bun she always wore for work. When she saw me walking in with Donald Trump, her face went through about 6 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. First confusion, then recognition, then fear, then more fear, then a desperate kind of hope, then back to fear again. She scrambled to her feet, nearly knocking over her bucket of cleaning supplies. Mr. Trump, she said, her voice shaking. I'm so sorry. Whatever Marcus did, I'll take full responsibility. Please, sir, he's a good boy. He just sometimes gets curious. He didn't mean any harm. Please don't. Mrs. Williams, Donald Trump said, holding up a hand. Gloria, please, your son hasn't done anything wrong. My mother blinked, thrown off balance. He hasn't? No. In fact, he's done something very right, something that most people twice his age couldn't do. And then Donald Trump told my mother what had happened. Not all of it. Not the part about his own failure at 15. But enough. The test. The wallet. The money. The moment I reached out. And the moment I pulled my hand back. By the time he finished, my mother was crying. Not the quiet, dignified tears of a woman trying to maintain composure. Real tears. The kind that came from somewhere deep, somewhere that had been holding on for too long. She pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. My boy, she whispered into my hair. My good, good boy. I held on to her, feeling the weight of her love, the strength of everything she had sacrificed for me. And I made a silent promise to myself that I would never, never let her down. When she finally released me, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, Donald Trump was watching us with an expression that was almost soft. Mrs. Williams, he said, your son has exceptional character. That's not something you learn from books or school. That comes from home. That comes from you. And I want to help him become everything he's capable of becoming. My mother's hand found mine and squeezed tight. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I mean that I want to pay for Marcus's education. All of it. High school, college, graduate school if he wants it, the best schools in the country. And I don't mean as a loan or a charity case. I mean as an investment. Because I believe your son is going to do great things and I want to be part of making that happen. The ballroom was silent. My mother stared at Donald Trump like he had just announced that gravity was optional. I felt like I was floating, like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet and I was suspended in some impossible moment between the life I had known and the life that was about to begin. Mr. Trump, my mother finally managed to say, I can't. This is too much. We can't accept. Yes, you can, he said firmly. And you will. Because this isn't about what you can accept. This is about what Marcus deserves. And he deserves a chance. A real chance. Not the scraps that life has been throwing at him, but the full opportunity to become who he's meant to be. He looked at me. What do you say, Marcus? Are you ready to work harder than you've ever worked in your life? Are you ready to prove that I'm right about you? I thought about Tyler Richmond and his expensive sneakers. I thought about the peanut butter sandwiches and the hole in my shoe. I thought about my grandmother who was slowly forgetting everything she had ever known. I thought about my mother, on her knees, scrubbing floors, giving everything she had so that I could have a chance. And I thought about the wallet, the money, the moment I pulled my hand back. "Yes, sir," I said. "I'm ready." If this story is inspiring you, please take a moment to hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. What happens next in my journey is something I never could have predicted. Stay with me. The months that followed felt like a dream I was terrified of waking up from. True to his word, Donald Trump arranged for me to transfer to one of the most prestigious private schools in Florida, a place called Palmer Academy that I had only ever heard about in whispers. The kind of school where senators' kids and CEOs' daughters learned alongside each other, where the parking lot was filled with cars that cost more than my mother's annual salary, where every hallway smelled like old money and future success. My first day there, I stood outside the main entrance for 15 minutes, unable to make myself walk through the doors. I was wearing a brand new uniform, perfectly fitted, paid for by a man I had met because I almost stole from him. The irony wasn't lost on me. Nothing about my life made sense anymore. But my mother's voice was in my head, as always. "You belong here, Marcus, not because of where you came from, but because of who you are. Now walk through that door and show them what you're made of." So I did. The first few weeks were brutal, not because anyone was cruel to me, not like Tyler Richmond had been. These kids were too polished for obvious cruelty. Their judgment came in subtler forms. The way conversations would pause when I approached. The way eyes would flicker to my face and then away, assessing, categorizing, dismissing. The way group projects would form around me rather than including me, like I was an obstacle to be navigated rather than a person to be known. I didn't have the vocabulary they had, the easy references to summer homes in the Hamptons and ski trips to Aspen. I didn't know which fork to use at formal dinners or how to tie a tie properly, or what lacrosse was beyond a vague idea that it involved sticks and running. Everything about this world was foreign to me, and every day felt like taking a test I hadn't studied for. But I had something they didn't. I had hunger. I had something to prove. While they coasted on the momentum of their parents' success, I worked like my life depended on it. Because in a very real way it did. I woke up at 5 every morning to study before classes. I stayed late in the library until the janitors kicked me out. I read everything I could get my hands on, not just the assigned texts, but histories and biographies and philosophy and economics. I asked questions that made my teachers pause and think. I wrote papers that came back with comments like exceptional insight and remarkable depth of analysis. By the end of my first semester, I had the highest GPA in my class. The other students started looking at me differently after that, not with acceptance exactly, but with something closer to respect. Or maybe just confusion. They couldn't figure out how this kid from nowhere, this scholarship case, this charity project, was outperforming all of them. It didn't fit the narrative they had been taught about how the world worked. I let my work speak for itself. I didn't brag. I didn't gloat. I just kept my head down and kept pushing forward one day at a time. Donald Trump checked in on me regularly during those years. Not constantly, not intrusively, but enough to let me know he was paying attention. A phone call here and there, a handwritten note when I made honor roll, an invitation to dinner at Mar-a-Lago when I finished my first year with distinction. Those dinners were surreal, sitting across from one of the most famous men in America, eating food I couldn't pronounce, talking about my classes and my goals and my dreams. He would listen intently, ask probing questions, offer advice that cut straight to the heart of whatever challenge I was facing. "Never let them see you sweat," he told me once. "You're going to be underestimated your whole life because of where you came from. Use that. Let them think you're not a threat. And then outwork every single one of them until they can't ignore you anymore." Another time, when I was struggling with a particularly difficult teacher who seemed determined to prove I didn't belong at Palmer, he said something that stuck with me forever. "Some people will try to tear you down because your success makes them uncomfortable. It forces them to question the story they tell themselves about why they're on top. If someone like you can succeed, what does that say about their own advantages? They would rather believe the game is fair and they won it on merit than admit they started on third base. Don't waste your energy hating them for it. Just keep hitting home runs until even they can't deny your talent. I carried those words with me through every setback, every slight, every moment of doubt, and there were many. The hardest part wasn't the academics. It was watching my mother continue to work while my own life transformed. She was still at Mar-a-Lago, still scrubbing floors and changing sheets, still coming home with her hands cracked and her body aching. Donald Trump had offered to give her an easier position, something administrative, something that wouldn't break her down day after day. But my mother refused. "I earn what I get," she told him with quiet dignity. "I always have, and I always will. You're giving my son a gift I can never repay, but I won't take charity for myself. That's not who I am." I think he respected her even more after that. I know I did. So she kept working, and I kept studying, and every Sunday we would sit together in our little apartment and she would ask me about my classes, and I would tell her stories about this strange new world I was navigating. She would laugh at my descriptions of the ridiculous wealth, shake her head at the casual entitlement, and always remind me of who I was and where I came from. "Don't you ever forget, Marcus," she would say. "Money doesn't make you better than anyone. Character does. And character is something you build with your choices every single day. I don't care if you become the richest man in the world someday. If you lose your character along the way, you've lost everything that matters." I graduated from Palmer Academy at the top of my class. Valedictorian. The kid who had almost been a thief standing at a podium in front of hundreds of wealthy families, giving a speech about perseverance and integrity and the power of second chances. My mother sat in the front row wearing a dress she had made herself, tears streaming down her face. Donald Trump was there too, a few rows back, nodding along as I spoke. And when I finished, when the applause washed over me like a wave, I looked out at all those faces and I thought about the version of myself that had stood in that office 4 years earlier, hand reaching for a wallet full of money that wasn't his. That boy felt like a stranger now, a ghost from another life. I had become someone new, someone better, someone worthy of everything I had been given. But the journey was far from over. College was the next step, and Donald Trump made it clear that he expected me to aim high. Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Princeton, he said during one of our dinners. "Pick your dream, and I'll make it happen. You've proven you can compete with anyone. Now prove you can lead." I chose Columbia. There was something about New York that called to me. The energy, the diversity, the sense that anything was possible if you were willing to work for it. Plus, Columbia had one of the best law schools in the country, and I had decided somewhere along the way that law was my calling. I wanted to spend my life fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. People like my mother. People like me. The transition to Columbia was easier than the transition to Palmer had been. By now I had learned how to navigate wealthy spaces without losing myself. I knew how to speak their language without forgetting my own. I knew how to compete without becoming ruthless, how to succeed without stepping on others. I made friends for the first time since childhood. Real friends, not just people who tolerated my presence. There was James, a third-generation legacy whose family owned half of Connecticut, who became my roommate and eventually one of my closest confidants. There was Maria, a first-generation college student from the Bronx, whose story echoed my own in so many ways. There was Professor Harrison, an aging constitutional scholar who took me under his wing and pushed me harder than anyone had ever pushed me before. These people, this place, this new chapter of my life, it all felt like confirmation that I was on the right path, that the choice I had made in Donald Trump's office all those years ago had set me on a trajectory I never could have imagined. But life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. Just when I thought I had figured everything out, everything fell apart. It was the spring of my junior year. I was preparing for law school applications, working part-time at a legal aid clinic in Harlem, and maintaining a GPA that would make me competitive for any program in the country. Life was good, better than good. Life was everything I had ever dreamed it could be. Then my mother called. The moment I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. She was trying to sound normal, trying to keep the fear out of her words, but I knew her too well. I could hear the tremor beneath the surface, the cracks in her careful composure. "Marcus," she said, "I need to tell you something." My grandmother had passed away 2 years earlier, slipping peacefully into whatever comes next, her memory already so far gone that she didn't recognize any of us at the end. That loss had been painful, but expected. This was different. This was my mother, my rock, my everything. "I went to the doctor last week," she continued. "I hadn't been feeling right for a while, tired all the time, lost some weight without trying. I thought it was just the work. You know how hard the summers are. But they ran some tests and—" She paused. The silence lasted an eternity. "It's cancer, Marcus. Stage 3 breast cancer. They caught it late. They're saying I need surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. They're saying it's going to be a fight." The world stopped spinning. I sat there in my dorm room, phone pressed to my ear, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to process what she was telling me. This couldn't be happening. Not to her. Not to the woman who had sacrificed everything for me, who had worked herself to the bone so I could have a chance, who had never asked for anything except that I become a good man. "I'll be there tomorrow," I said when I could finally speak. "I'm coming home." "No," she said firmly. "You're not. You have school. You have your future. I didn't raise you to throw everything away because I got sick. Mom, Marcus, listen to me." Her voice was steady now, the voice of a woman who had faced hard things before and refused to flinch. "I am going to fight this with everything I have, and you are going to stay in school and finish what you started. That's how you help me. That's how you make all of this worth it. You understand?" I wanted to argue. I wanted to get on the next plane and be by her side, but I heard something in her voice that stopped me. Pride. Not the arrogant kind, but the deep, quiet kind that comes from a lifetime of choosing dignity over despair. She needed to know that everything she had done, every sacrifice she had made, had been worth it. She needed to see me cross that finish line. "I understand," I whispered, "but I'm calling you every day. And I'm coming home for every break, and you're going to beat this. You hear me? You're going to beat this." She laughed softly, the sound of a mother who loved her son more than words could say. "I hear you, baby. I hear you." The next year was the hardest of my life, balancing school with terror, studying for exams while my mother underwent surgery, writing law school applications while she lost her hair to chemotherapy, celebrating my acceptance to Columbia Law while she fought through radiation that left her so weak she could barely stand. Donald Trump stepped up in ways I never expected. He made sure my mother had the best doctors, the best treatment, the best care available. He arranged for a private nurse to check on her when I couldn't be there. He even called her himself sometimes, checking in, offering encouragement, reminding her that she had a lot to live for. "Your son is going to change the world, Gloria," he told her once when I was listening from the other room. "And he learned everything that matters from you. So you fight. You fight for him, you fight for yourself, and you beat this thing." She did. It took 18 months, but she beat it. The cancer went into remission just before I started law school. I remember getting the call, standing in the middle of Broadway, tears streaming down my face while strangers hurried past. My mother, on the other end of the line, laughing and crying at the same time. "We did it, baby," she said. "We did it." "No, Mom," I said back. "You did it. You always do." Law school was a blur of casebooks and moot courts and sleepless nights, but I attacked it with the same intensity I had brought to everything else. My mother's illness had taught me something important. Time is not promised. Success is not guaranteed. Every day is a gift, and you either use it or you waste it. I chose to use it. By the time I graduated, I had job offers from the most prestigious law firms in the country. Places that represented corporations and billionaires. Places that could have made me wealthy beyond anything my 14-year-old self could have imagined. But I turned them all down. Instead, I took a position at a public interest law firm that specialized in representing low-income families. The pay was a fraction of what I could have earned elsewhere. The hours were just as brutal. But every day, I woke up knowing that I was fighting for people like my mother. People who worked hard and played by the rules and still got crushed by a system that wasn't designed for them. That was worth more than any salary. And through it all, Donald Trump remained a presence in my life. Not a constant one, but a consistent one. A mentor from a distance. A reminder that people could surprise you, that generosity could come from unexpected places, that one moment of grace could ripple outward for a lifetime. He invited me to dinner after I passed the bar exam. We sat in the same room at Mar-a-Lago where everything had started, and he looked at me with something that might have been pride. "You did it," he said simply. "Everything I saw in you that day, you proved it. You proved me right." "You gave me the chance," I replied. "Without you, I'd still be—" "No." He cut me off with a shake of his head. "I gave you resources. I gave you opportunity. But you did the work. You made the choices. That boy who put down the wallet and walked away, he's the one who got you here. Never forget that. I never have. If you're still with me on this journey, I want you to know that what comes next is the moment that changed everything. The moment when everything I had learned, everything I had become, was put to the ultimate test. Please take a second to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Your support means more than you know. 10 years passed. 10 years of fighting in courtrooms for families who couldn't afford to fight for themselves. 10 years of small victories and heartbreaking losses. 10 years of becoming the man my mother always believed I could be. I was 34 years old when I got the invitation that brought everything full circle. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon, a thick cream envelope with gold embossing, the kind of invitation that announced itself as important before you even opened it. Inside was a request to speak at a gala fundraiser for underprivileged youth at Mar-a-Lago. The host, of course, was Donald Trump. I hadn't seen him in person for almost 3 years. Our communication had dwindled to occasional emails and holiday cards, the natural drift that happens when lives move in different directions. But reading that invitation, I felt the weight of everything we had shared pressing against my chest. I called him that night. "You want me to speak?" I said when he answered. "At your gala." "I want you to tell your story," he replied. "These kids need to hear it. They need to know that where you start doesn't have to be where you finish. And nobody tells that story better than you, Marcus." I could have said no. I was busy. I had cases piling up, clients who needed me, a life that didn't leave much room for trips to Florida. But some invitations aren't really invitations. They're callings. And this one had been calling to me for 20 years. "I'll be there," I told him. The night of the gala, I stood backstage at Mar-a-Lago, listening to the murmur of hundreds of voices on the other side of the curtain. My mother was in the audience, healthy and strong, her hair long and silver now, her face lined with the beautiful evidence of a life fully lived. She had retired 2 years earlier, finally accepting that she had earned the right to rest. Donald Trump had given her a generous pension, though she still insisted on calling it an early retirement package rather than a gift. Some things never change. I had written a speech, carefully crafted remarks about opportunity and perseverance and the importance of investing in young people. But standing there in the wings, I realized I couldn't deliver those words. They were too polished, too safe, too far from the raw truth of what had actually happened. So I threw away the speech. When I walked onto that stage, when I looked out at all those faces, wealthy donors and struggling teenagers and everyone in between, I told them the real story. Not the sanitized version, not the inspirational summary, the truth. I told them about the apartment with the thin walls, about Tyler Richmond and his expensive sneakers, about the hole in my shoe that I covered with marker. I told them about wandering through Mar-a-Lago, about finding the office, about seeing Donald Trump asleep in his chair with a wallet full of money just sitting there, and I told them about reaching for it. A murmur went through the crowd. I could see confusion on some faces, discomfort on others. This wasn't the story they had expected to hear. This wasn't the simple narrative of a poor kid who worked hard and made good. This was messier, more human, more real. I was going to take that money, I continued, my voice steady. I was 14 years old and I had every reason in the world to steal. We needed that money. My mother was working herself to death. My grandmother needed medication we couldn't afford. And there it was, thousands of dollars just sitting there like it was nothing, like it was waiting for me. I paused, letting the weight of the confession settle over the room, but I didn't take it. Not because I'm special. Not because I'm better than anyone else. I didn't take it because of my mother, because of the value she had instilled in me, because somewhere deep inside, deeper than the fear and the desperation and the anger, there was a voice that told me who I was, and who I was, who I am, is not a thief. I looked out at the teenagers in the audience, kids from backgrounds like mine, kids who had probably faced similar temptations, similar moments where the easy wrong beckoned and the hard right seemed impossible. Every single one of you is going to face that moment, I told them. Maybe you already have. Maybe it's coming tomorrow. But at some point, life is going to test you. It's going to put something in front of you that you want, something you think you need, and it's going to whisper that no one will ever know, that it doesn't really matter, that everyone else would do the same thing. I shook my head slowly. Don't believe it. It does matter. It matters more than anything else. Because in that moment, you're not just choosing whether to take something that isn't yours. You're choosing who you're going to be. You're writing a story that you'll have to live with for the rest of your life. And trust me, no amount of money, no temporary gain, is worth becoming someone you can't respect. I told them about Donald Trump opening his eyes, about the conversation that followed, the confession he had made, the offer that had changed my life. I told them about Palmer Academy and Columbia and law school and all the years of hard work that had brought me to where I stood today. But here's what I want you to understand, I said. Donald Trump didn't save me. He gave me an opportunity. A remarkable, generous, life-changing opportunity. But opportunities are just doors. You still have to walk through them. You still have to do the work. You still have to make the right choices day after day when no one is watching and no one would ever know. I looked directly at the teenagers now, trying to reach them, trying to bridge the gap between my experience and theirs. I'm not standing here because I got lucky. I'm standing here because on the hardest day of my life, when everything in me wanted to take the easy path, I chose the hard one instead. And that choice, that single moment of decision, created a ripple that I'm still riding 20 years later. The room was silent. I could feel the attention like a physical weight. Hundreds of eyes fixed on me. Hundreds of hearts considering what I was saying. So here's what I want to leave you with tonight, I continued. Your character is not determined by your circumstances. It's not determined by how much money your parents have or what neighborhood you grew up in or what kind of shoes you wear to school. Your character is determined by what you do when no one is watching. By the choices you make in the moments that seem small but are actually everything. I took a breath, feeling the emotion rising in my chest. You are not your worst impulse. You are not the voice that tells you to take the easy way out. You are the voice that says no. You are the strength that pulls your hand back. You are every good choice you've ever made and every good choice you're going to make. And I believe in you. All of you. I believe that you have the same thing inside you that I found inside myself that day. The same integrity, the same courage, the same refusal to become less than what you're capable of being. I paused one final time. 20 years ago, I almost stole from one of the richest men in America. Tonight, I'm standing on his stage telling you my story. If that's not proof that your future is not written by your past, I don't know what is. The applause started slowly, a few hands clapping in the back of the room. Then it spread, growing louder and louder until it filled the entire ballroom. People were standing. Some of them were crying. And in the front row, my mother was looking at me with an expression I will carry with me until the day I die. Pride. Pure, radiant, uncontainable pride. After the speech, I found Donald Trump in a quiet corner of the ballroom. He was older now, his hair a distinctive shade that had become iconic, his face familiar from 1,000 television appearances and newspaper covers. But his eyes were the same. Sharp. Assessing. Missing nothing. That wasn't the speech I expected, he said. I know. He studied me for a long moment. It was better. I smiled, feeling something ease in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. Thank you, I said, for everything. I don't think I've ever really said that properly. You changed my life. He shook his head slowly. I gave you money, Marcus. I opened some doors. But you're the one who walked through them. You're the one who did the work. Don't give me credit for your success. You earned every bit of it. We stood there in comfortable silence for a moment. Two men separated by decades and dollars but connected by something deeper. I told them about what you shared with me, I said finally. About the envelope you found when you were 15. About the choice you made. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than I had ever heard it. I've thought about that day more times than I can count. Wondered what my life would have been like if I had made a different choice. If I had been stronger. If I had been more like you. He looked at me with something that might have been wonder. When I saw you put that wallet down and walk away, I saw the person I wished I had been. The person I spent the rest of my life trying to become. You taught me something that day, Marcus. Something I've never forgotten. What's that? That it's never too late to choose integrity. That every moment is a new opportunity to be better than we were before. That redemption isn't something that happens to us. It's something we build, one choice at a time. I felt tears threatening at the corners of my eyes. I think we taught each other, I said. He smiled, a rare and genuine expression that transformed his entire face. Maybe we did. A year later, I argued my first case before the Supreme Court. It was a landmark housing discrimination case, representing a group of families who had been systematically denied loans because of their race and zip code. We won. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was a statement, a declaration that everyone deserves a fair chance, regardless of where they started. My mother watched from the gallery, her hands clasped in her lap, tears streaming silently down her face. Afterward, she hugged me in the hallway of the Supreme Court building, surrounded by lawyers and journalists and cameras. Your father would have been proud, she whispered. I know we don't talk about him. But he would have been so proud of the man you've become. It was the first time she had mentioned him in 30 years. And in that moment, I understood that some wounds do heal. Slowly. Imperfectly. But they heal. I'm 44 now. I've argued 7 cases before the Supreme Court. I've helped change laws that protect millions of families. I've mentored dozens of young people from backgrounds like mine, trying to pay forward what was given to me. And every year I return to Mar-a-Lago for that gala, to tell my story again, to remind another generation that their future is not determined by their past. My mother is 72. She lives in a comfortable house in West Palm Beach, not far from where we used to struggle in that tiny apartment. She gardens, volunteers at her church, and spoils her 2 grandchildren, my daughter Gloria and my son David, named after the grandfather he never met. She has never stopped being the strongest person I know. Donald Trump and I still talk, though less frequently now. Our lives have taken different paths, led us to different places. But there is a bond between us that time cannot break. A shared understanding of what it means to be tested, and what it means to choose wisely. I think often about that day in the office, about the wallet, about my hand reaching toward the money, about the voice in my head that told me to take it. And I realize now that the whole trajectory of my life turned on a single moment of decision. A moment that lasted maybe 5 seconds, a moment that no one else would ever have known about if I had chosen differently. But I would have known, and I would have had to live with that knowledge for the rest of my life. Here's what I've learned in all my years since that summer afternoon. Life is not made up of the big, dramatic moments we see in movies. It's made up of small choices accumulated over time. The choice to study instead of sleep. The choice to tell the truth when lying would be easier. The choice to help someone when you could just walk by. The choice to put down the wallet and walk away. These choices seem insignificant in the moment. But they're not. They're everything. They're the building blocks of character. They're the foundation upon which your entire life is constructed. And here's the other thing I've learned. The universe has a way of responding to our choices, not always immediately, not always obviously. But there is a rhythm to life, a pattern of cause and effect that we can only see in hindsight. Every action creates a reaction. Every choice sets something in motion. We may not understand the consequences until years later, but they're always there, rippling outward from the moments we thought no one was watching. What you put out into the world comes back to you. Not because of magic or fate or divine intervention, but because of the simple truth that we create our lives through our actions. Choose integrity, and you build a life of integrity. Choose kindness, and you build a life of kindness. Choose courage, and you build a life of courage. It's not complicated, but it's not easy either. I think about the person I could have become if I had taken that money. Maybe I would have gotten away with it. Maybe no one would ever have known. But I would have known. And that knowledge would have poisoned everything that came after. It would have whispered to me in quiet moments that I was a fraud, that I didn't deserve my success, that underneath it all I was just a thief who got lucky. Instead, I get to look at myself in the mirror and know that everything I have, I earned. Not because I'm smarter or more talented than anyone else, but because in the moment that mattered most, I chose to be the person my mother raised me to be. That is the greatest gift she ever gave me. Not money, not opportunity, but values, principles, a compass that has guided me through every storm. And if you take nothing else from my story, I hope you take this. You are capable of more than you know. You are stronger than your circumstances. And no matter what you've done in the past, no matter what mistakes you've made, you can choose differently starting right now, starting this moment. It's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. This is my story. The story of a poor kid from West Palm Beach who almost became a thief and instead became something more. It's a story about temptation and choice, about failure and redemption, about the power of one moment to change everything. But here's the thing. It's not really my story. It's everyone's story. Because every single one of us faces these moments. Every single one of us has to decide who we're going to be when no one is watching. What will you choose? I know what I chose, and I know the life it gave me. A life of purpose. A life of meaning. A life where I can look my mother in the eye and know that I made her proud. If you've made it this far in my story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your time is precious and you chose to spend it with me. That means more than you know. If this story touched you, if it made you think about your own life and your own choices, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Not for me, but for the next person who needs to hear it. Every like, every subscription helps this story reach someone who might be standing at their own crossroads, trying to decide which path to take. And if you have a story of your own, a moment when you chose the hard right over the easy wrong, I would love to hear it. Leave a comment below. Share your experience. You never know who might be reading, who might need to hear that they're not alone. We are all in this together. All of us, trying to become better versions of ourselves. All of us, learning and growing and stumbling and getting back up again. That's what it means to be human. And that's what makes life beautiful. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And remember, the next time you face a moment of decision, the next time the easy wrong beckons and the hard right seems impossible, you have everything you need inside you to choose wisely. You just have to believe it. This is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real events or the use of public names is purely for narrative effect and does not represent actual events. We respect YouTube's policies and the individuals mentioned in this story.